Hey, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Mama Pies Before the Lesson podcast. I'm your host, Carlos Smiley. We thank you for joining us this week. Now, I understand that this episode is a little bit late. Quite frankly, I was concerned that everybody, especially me, had come to expect each episode to come out late Tuesday or definitely by early Wednesday. So here I find myself, feeling innocent, but realizing that I'm so guilty. I'm guilty for trying to push God to make magical, meaningful words come to my mind so that I could deliver an earthly product on time and on schedule. But how many of us have learned that God don't work like that? In his own time, in his own way, God is telling me his blessing on what I was pushing for wasn't going to be authorized until he released it. He told me that the lessons that needed to be loosed into the atmosphere, into the hearts and minds of those of us that needed to hear it and were willing to accept it, needed to stay in the oven just a little while longer, so that when they were released, the lessons came with blessings. Y'all, please don't count it to my heart. Just count it to my head. So this week, we're continuing in the book of John. Now, I know that we've been here for a minute, but sometimes we need to, like my pastor says, sit in a thing. Understand the real message that God is conveying. Y'all know we like to walk through a thing and act like we got it. But sometimes messages come clearer the second time around. So in this week's lesson, we'll be looking at the nuanced events leading up to Jesus' healing of a blind man. We will clearly see how when you and I are walking in our calling, you ain't got to make a big deal out of it. You ain't got to put on a major production. When you're dripping with God's blessing and operating in his purpose, you can make spitballs and rub them in a man's eyes, and not only open his eyes, but bring light to this present darkness in a way, shape, and form where darkness has no choice but to flee. So hopefully, after today's conversation, we'll feel more personally in tune with and understanding of the challenges that our biblical heroes in the upcoming Sunday school lesson had to deal with. So if you like what you hear, please click on the button below and subscribe to our channel. The title of Sunday's lesson is Healing the Blind Man. Scriptural basis of our lesson is out of John, the 9th chapter. So the question is, how do we get from last week, which was a conversation in Samaria, to this week, opening the eyes of a damaged world? How do we get from there to here? We all remember Jesus' urgings, strong urgings, if you will, or must needs to go through Samaria in last week's encounter with the woman at the well. Even though this was both a physical and divine need, it was also a very smart business decision. As we recall, he was traveling from Judea to Galilee, with Samaria being smack dab in the middle of those two cities. So to have unnecessarily traveled across the Jordan River just to avoid coming in contact with a certain group of people who happened to be your relatives was not only borderline racist, but it also was a waste of time and money. So here he is, back in Galilee, back with family and friends, still doing the miraculous, still healing and converting new followers, still doing the things that he came to this earth to do. And then came the Festival of the Booths, the Feast of the Tabernacles. This was another feast that the Jewish people held in the fall of the year to celebrate the gatherings of the harvest, as well as the Jewish exodus from Egypt. Now, Jesus' half-brothers, James, who wrote the book of James in the New Testament, Jose, Jude, who wrote the book of Jude in the New Testament, and Simon were all urging Jesus to go back to Judea, to not only recognize the feast of the tabernacle, but to also show off his powers. Scripture says that even his own brothers, and I'll add at the time, didn't believe in Jesus. Although they were urging him to go, he knew that the Jewish leadership was plotting and scheming to kill him. So he didn't travel to attend the festival with his brothers, at least at that time. You see, what we see here is a brother, i.e., Jesus, on his own timetable. In this world, when people see that you've got skills, when they know that you're blessed and highly favored, they immediately want to push you to do more. Put your gifts on display, man. Let the world see your brilliance. However, sometimes when people are supposedly pushing you to greater, it can also selfishly be because they want to ride on your coattails. We need to be very cautious with allowing people to push us into a place when we ain't ready to go there. Or more importantly, when God has not released us to go. Even Jesus understood the importance of expressing the fact that my time has not come yet. Now, the festival occurred approximately 6 months before the events of the courts and the crucifixion. So we know that the Jewish leadership was coming for him. And we also know that Jesus was giving it to him. So Jesus' discretion and reservation relative to traveling to the festival only lasted a couple of days. He went on down to Judea and once again began doing what he was sent to this earth to do: teaching, preaching, and converting followers to the way. There, Jesus was pointing out the hypocrisy of the Jewish leadership. This teaching, in addition to his reputation for performing miracles, augmented a crisis of confidence in the Jewish leadership. From the perspective of the people, there were only 3 possibilities. Either the leaders were too weak to stop a blasphemer like the carpenter's son, or they were too confused to know what to do about him, or maybe they secretly accepted that he is, who in what he says he is. These actions and the people's response to Jesus, it only added fuel to an already combustible mix: Jesus and the Jewish leadership. In their minds, they had no other choice but to extinguish Jesus. Wherever Jesus went, he had a way of raising the temperature in the room. His presence provoked rumors, discussions, and arguments among the people themselves. So you know what the Jewish leadership was dealing with. Clearly, they had a Jesus problem. Y'all remember Nicodemus, a member of the Sanhedrin, the same man who spoke with Jesus by night, the same dude that would retrieve Jesus' body after the crucifixion. Now, he made an appeal on Jesus' behalf for due process. In response, his peers, his co-council members, the Sanhedrin, ridiculed him and rejected his premise. Through the actions of the Sanhedrin, we see how arrogance, ignorance, and tradition can ultimately lead to spiritual blindness. These people were so bent on getting Jesus, they resorted to pulling a woman off the street and without any due process, accusing her of adultery and demanding that Jesus pass judgment on her, to try and catch Jesus between the law and the new theology that he was espousing. They wanted to put Jesus in a dilemma to ultimately delete him. They said, "Master, this woman was taken in the very act of adultery. Moses' law requires that she be, what say you?" Now, to show you how cool, calm, and collected Jesus was, he acted like he didn't even hear him, didn't say a word, he stooped and began to write on the ground with his finger. When they persisted, he stood up and totally flipped the script on them. He simply posed the question, "He that is without sin among you, let him cast the first stone." Then once again, he stooped down and continued to write on the ground. When he finally looked up, the only person that remained was a woman. So he asked her, "Where are your accusers? Have any of them condemned you?" She answered in the negative. Then Jesus said, "Neither do I. Go and sin no more." Through his actions, Jesus shows that simply having power, such as having the authority to execute a guilty person, doesn't make using it the wisest and best option. Just because you work in law enforcement don't mean that you got to pull a trigger over a traffic stop. Instead, Jesus demonstrates grace and mercy, and he puts it all on full display. The level of humanity that the Jewish leadership then, as well as the world's leadership now, they can't quite comprehend that. This passage begs the question, where are all them folk that's so quick to throw shade and try to bring negativity into your life? But when you put them on Front Street, if they really real, if they really real, they come to the realization that they gotta sweep around their own front door. As Jesus continues his discourse with the Jewish leadership, it becomes more heated and eventually turns to Father Abraham, the receiver of the promise. In the process, the Jewish leadership resorts to insults, including smears relative to Jesus' birth, and suggesting that he's insane. Jesus responds by continuing to talk about Abraham and suggesting that he has firsthand knowledge of Abraham's response to his own ministry. As the crowd continues to grow, Jesus continues to speak boldly in informing that he is the light of the world, and anybody that follows him shall not walk in darkness. He lets them know that if they continue in his words, that they will know the truth, and the truth shall make them free. Now, the detractors argued the point that they were never in bondage and that they have always been free. As the conversation continues to rise in point-counterpoint, the engagement reaches a crescendo and ultimately a point of no return when Jesus boldly claims that, "Verily, verily, I say unto you, before Abraham was, I am." At this point, just as they tried to do to the woman accused of adultery, when the Jewish leadership heard Jesus utter those words, it solidified their decision to kill him. They tried to stone him to death. So now we know that when the heat is on and everything and everybody around you look to be getting a little shaky, it's on Christ, a solid rock we stand. All other ground is sinking sand. So on Sunday, we'll see a sold out Jesus. I can hear him saying that I am who I am. Continuing to go back and forth with you folks is a waste of my time. I'm on the downside of why I came to earth, and I'm going to see my Father's mission through to fruition. All that we got to do is abide under the shadow of the Almighty, because he is our refuge and our fortress, and it's in him we must trust. Looking forward to next week's lesson as we go back in and dig a little deeper here on the Before the Lesson podcast. Until next time, be blessed.